Hi, Scott. Welcome to Coinscrum's Meet Founders series. So my name is Yatu Yoga. I'm an anthropologist working in the crypto space, and thought we'd talk today about your platform Blocksettle today. But before we do that, I thought it's always nice to get a background from where you're coming. So can you provide a background from where you're coming into the crypto space?
Hello, Yatu. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So Blocksettle, it's actually three people who founded it, even if it's just me here on the call. So the other co-founders, Albert Jansson, who is an old Swedish friend who also lived in London, who went out to China to help co-found a dating app. And since then, he left to found Blocksettle together with me and Farod Fatpour, who is his handle is Goatpig. He's the lead maintainer of Armory. And so a bit about my background, since I'm basically the person who tied everyone together. So in London, where I got to know Albert, it's quite funny, even if the Swedish community is quite large in London, we tend to hang out with each other very much. So I got to know Albert quite well in London, and we stayed in contact. And I was a derivatives trader at the time. He was working at Goldman Sachs, and as my girlfriend at the time, we got married and had children. We moved back to Sweden. And I took my derivatives trading with me to Sweden, and which I did there for another 6 or 7 years or so. Mm-hmm. And while you're sitting there trading, you have a lot of time to read financial markets, etc. And it's very much of a hobby of mine. Mm-hmm. So you're basically in front of screens 12 to 14 hours a day. And while you're there, one of my main interests is reading about how the monetary system works, basically. And once you understand how the system works and how all the ledger accountings and central banks and currency issuance, etc., you develop an opinion on what it looks like and how it functions. And then all of a sudden, I think it was 2011 or so, I saw this article in a banner when I was reading an article about how the Swedish Supreme Court should have heard the Pirate Bay case. And so I read into it, and it was an article about Bitcoin, and down the rabbit hole I went. So it was very, very interesting to me, like working in finance and being very interested in how the monetary system works, to actually find an asset where you, as the account holder, control the asset. All of a sudden, it's not the ledger keeping institution which controls the asset on your behalf. It's the account holder itself. So the hierarchy model completely changes. And as you understand more and more about this, you see that there's a lot of new settlement models that come about because of it. And it becomes possible to, have delivery versus payment, actual delivery versus payment, and other very interesting settlement models. So that grew with me for quite some time, and I mean back then the space was very nascent and quite undeveloped. But Albert and I had a discussion around this back and forth, and then here in Sweden, I actually was a co-founder of another enterprise called Cryex here in Sweden, which we raised a bit of money for, and at that time, I got to know the Armory people because we were looking at a custody solution while we were building it. Eventually, both Armory as well as Cryex, they pivoted to, or Cryex pivoted and Armory, I think, didn't have enough funding. Farod and myself and Albert, we decided to start Blocksettle. And because the problem we were effectively looking at was the way the ecosystem was built then, and even very much today, is that even if you have this asset ledger where you're meant to custody the assets yourself, much of all the shall we say, exchange models are built around giving up that custody to a third party. So even if you have this like beautiful ledger where the stakeholder to the ledger is meant to be able to hold the assets themselves, all the models that were built up around it had the premise of you having to give up control to a centralized exchange where they control both the cash component as well as the Bitcoin component, because otherwise they cannot guarantee the fulfillment of settlement obligations. So what we did was set out to build a model where that was turned upside down, where the Bitcoin leg or the blockchain leg was transferred directly between the participants to a trade, whereas the cash leg would be settled on account, basically like any exchange, but the exchange wouldn't custody any Bitcoin. It would custody cash, so you pre-fund cash, and the Bitcoin settlement goes peer-to-peer.
So from reading about your project, it's really interesting, and you want to. But I was just thinking, okay, there's other kind of peer-to-peer kind of crypto exchanges as well, right? Like local Bitcoins, and so how is kind of Blocksettle, as like someone coming from this financial background, how are you kind of approaching that? How is it your project kind of different to that, those kind of peer-to-peer exchanges?
Okay, I mean, that's an excellent question. Many of those peer-to-peer exchanges, they have decentralized both the cash leg as well as the Bitcoin leg. So what happens in those models is that you set up a multi-signature Bitcoin address, you pre-deposit the Bitcoins into that address, and then you need to transfer your funds directly to me, to my bank account, or through whatever means. And once that's completed, the idea is that I unlock the multi-sig so that you can receive the Bitcoin you've bought. So it's a model that doesn't have, shall we say, a lot of liquidity. It's also a model where you interface other people directly. So your bank may ask a lot of questions all of a sudden if you start trading very heavily. But very much it's a illiquid market. The spreads are wide. It's very difficult to do a lot of trading, and there's no centralized cash settlement. So a trade can take anywhere from, shall we say, a day, depending on payment system, to multiple days. Whereas in our model, it works just like any other exchange, Kraken, Bitstamp, etc., where everyone pre-deposits cash first. We have that on account, and then people can trade and settle in real time with each other. So you have all the efficiencies of a centralized exchange, but all the benefits of the self-custody of the peer-to-peer models.
Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. And so I saw that you offer kind of like OTC trading as well. So it seems it's quite similar to that.
Yes, well, the trading becomes very much a OTC model. It's just the way we match make. So you can really break the trading down into two aspects, like how do you match make, which is how do you get two people to be matched with each other bilaterally, and then the second question is how do you do the settlement between these two people.
Right.
So with regards to the first question, since many times in an order book, if you've traded stocks or a Bitstamp or any, shall we say, central limit order book, when someone sells into the order book, they may have 20 counterparties if you sell a large order and have many counterparties on the other side. But in our model, it's very difficult because you need both people to basically turn the keys to do the transaction. So you need effectively real-time signing. So in that, having 20 counterparties at the same time isn't ideal. So we need models where you match up people so they trade bilaterally. So in the FX market, if you exchange any dollars to euros, for instance, you ask your bank for a quote, and they tell you this is the price we're willing to trade at. They are effectively a single dealer in that model. There are other models where you have multi-dealer platforms where you send a request for quotes, and you have 20 counterparties respond with different prices. And you select which price you want, and then you're matched with the best counterpart. So the way it works, it's open model, anyone can quote. So you send an RFQ to the system, everyone gets the RFQ, anyone can respond, and the most competitive response you're matched with.
So, okay, that makes sense. And so just kind of thinking about this kind of exchanges, one question I'm always thinking in the back of my mind that I never kind of maybe ask out loud is kind of just, so what is the kind of the regulatory landscape like in kind of Sweden and kind of helping in kind of making this come about? Yeah, what are the challenges that are facing you, and how do you kind of address those kind of regulatory issues?
I would say Sweden has a fantastic regulatory climate. It should be harmonized across the EU how it works, given that they're all under the same rules and regulations, all the different. In Sweden, we have Finansinspektionen, and we're a payment service provider. So we have all the regulations. We're allowed to custody cash on users' behalf. They have deposit insurance. We have a bank in Estonia, LHV, into which all the customers' pre-deposit funds, all the cash is segregated. We have all the AML and KYC requirements placed on all exchanges. So I'd say the regulatory landscape is no different with regards to our model if you compare it to anyone else.
Okay, cool. And so I was reading through your kind of your platform's kind of blog, I think, and it was and there were discussions about kind of tainted bitcoins, and I thought that was interesting. So how does your kind of platform kind of it seems to address that issue immediately without having custody, right?
Correct. Many times all the centralized exchanges, when you want to sell Bitcoin, you need to send your Bitcoins to them. Once you've done so, what they do is they send these coins to Chainalysis or any of the other Elliptic or any of the other on-chain, should we say, scoring services. And if your coins score a bit low, there's going to be many follow-up questions. Because obviously, if you buy coins from Kraken or whoever, you don't want to receive coins which are, should we say, the result of a hack or blacklisted. So what we do in our model, in order to develop our model, the way it works is that whoever's selling Bitcoin needs to show the UTXOs or the actual coins they're selling prior to them being sold. So at that point, we do the screening then. And if the score comes in too low, we just prohibit the trade.
Is there kind of so just coming from a kind of, financial background, working in derivatives, is there kind of a similar kind of thing in like just normal finance of this kind of not knowing whether you can trust something being blacklisted in this way and how you go about dealing with that? Because it seems kind of a problem kind of unique to cryptocurrency, and I wonder how many kind of coins are going to become tainted and how people are going to deal with that.
It's a very good question. I'd say the closest you come is probably if you go to the bank and you want to deposit £10,000 in cash, and they're going to ask, where does this cash come from? But that's more of an AML question as opposed to a tainted question. And if you're not able to provide a satisfactory answer, they just won't accept the cash. So it's a bit the same with us.
Yeah. It's interesting to see what kind of coins become tainted, because I think you pointed out in your blog as well, maybe that it's also kind of people working on kind of casinos as well, right? Maybe if it comes from casinos, they become tainted as well. I
think it's all of these different companies score differently. In some jurisdictions, casino coins aren't possible to trade. In others, I think there's a lot more stringent requirements. So it's not just casinos. It can be seen from, I don't know, any service that isn't previously known.
Mm. Okay, and as someone, coming from this kind of more professional kind of finance background, and when you were in 2011, kind of started following this kind of crypto market, did you just hold your hands in your head and was like, what are they doing? Like, it was kind of like people trying to start up, finance again, maybe, right? So did you see kind of like a lot of mistakes being made and thought, okay, well, this is actually how it should be done and I can be of real value here?
Well, I think there's always, when a market is new, there's a lot of opportunity, and many times the people are the absolute first movers into a space. Maybe are not the ones who develop the, shall we say, systems which are viable long term. But I think many of the businesses developed back then that exist today, they've become very professional, and in terms of both the people and the depth of tech that they employ. But obviously back then everything was very, very new.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Mount Gox, the deficiencies of that exchange probably wouldn't be possible today.
Yeah, and I think, well, hopefully. So do you have an idea of like who are the kind of people kind of using your kind of Blocksettle and your kind of exchanges?
Well, it's mainly people are more, shall we say, not first-time users, slightly more savvy. They understand the need for holding your own coins, why you shouldn't trust centralized exchanges, why you want to pursue a model that basically resonates with what Bitcoin was built to do, basically, where you custody your own coins and trade peer-to-peer.
Yeah. So just jumping in between questions as it comes to me, and so when you were working as a derivatives trader, did you talk to like other people in the financial sector, and did they look at you kind of baffled, kind of going into Bitcoin, or I've talked to other kind of people in finance who are like it's nothing, but what was it very much you, or did like other people around you kind of start seeing kind of Bitcoin as kind of an interesting thing as well?
I think many of the first is very often a skepticism, but then as they start to dig into it themselves and they start to consider all the implications and edge cases, they very often end up in a situation where they start thinking, is it possible to build something around this? Scalable, will it work? But back then, I think there was a lot of, shall we say, negative media around blockchains, Bitcoin, which you don't have to the same extent today. Back then, it was more of a concern around AML and KYC, as opposed to today. Now it's more of a concern around price many times, as it has developed into an asset class of itself. So I think, just like with most things, the people who take the time to dig into it and look deeper, many times saw something.
Yeah, I guess beyond the news cycles and the hypes, and people who dug in really saw something. So coming from your kind of more professional background, how do you think the space has been professionalized and made more kind of maybe palatable to this kind of institutional world? Like, what kind of things have been more like important, do you think, for kind of maybe big traders and professional traders to kind of come into the space?
I'd say there's been two major developments. One is proper custody solutions. Many banks and financial institutions are not like private individuals where they're comfortable holding their own keys. So within a big organization, how do you distribute the keys? Who controls things? Who is authorized to do transactions? How do we back things up, et cetera, et cetera? So there's, I think, a lot of questions still left to figure out in these areas. But that's one area where a lot of work has been done, and the work that's been done there has, to a large extent, allowed for many more institutions to come in. That's one area. The other area is having Bitcoin being viewed much more as an asset class in itself for institutions to even consider dipping their toe in. Is this something you want exposure to?
Yeah, definitely. And you kind of mentioned in passing that, so what questions do you think need to be addressed for kind of more kind of institutional kind of players to kind of come into the space?
Well, another big area that's been addressed is also the ability to hedge, so that you have proper futures contracts or CFD contracts, which is in an asset this volatile always, should I say, helpful. On the other hand, and it's not just institutional, but for this model to grow, I think the second layer additions on top of the base layers need to be worked on much more, and for them to develop. So if you look at Bitcoin, if you view that as the, shall we say, settlement layer of the system, you need different layers, such as payment layers. How do you get Bitcoin to interact with the financial system? How can you trade shares, issue shares, have them trade in real time against each other? There's a lot of these questions that I think are being worked on right now, and everything from, shall we say, side chains to different models of issuing assets on chain, regardless if it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, or and the whole DeFi move that we're seeing lately, where you have actually one asset being exchanged for another in atomic swaps directly between users.
Yeah, that must be kind of exciting for you as well, kind of the DeFi space kind of popping up as well.
It's super exciting. And then there's obviously also the question with regards to institutions, since they are de facto keepers of record. So they're effectively ledger keeping institutions that rely on other people to have accounts with them. So what happens in a world where, if it's even feasible, where the account holders themselves hold their own keys? Like, what does the institutional role look like in such models?
Yeah, such big questions to kind of think about as well, I guess.
I think it's way too soon. I mean, there's so much to figure out within the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sweden seems like a good place to think about it in terms of kind of these kind of questions as well. Okay, so so maybe just to quickly kind of get your thoughts on, like, what else is kind of exciting you around the crypto space? What do you think is kind of happening well? Some things that are not happening so well that you're kind of interested in, maybe outside of your kind of jurisdiction as well.
I think there should be a lot more focus on building the secondary layers. I think the actual wallet software and maintaining keys and that type of basic work, since it's been difficult to monetize, I think that there hasn't been enough work in those areas in many regards. There isn't enough, shall we say, standards across wallets in terms of backups and
right,
etc. So there's, as well as all the payment layers, like if you want to open a web shop and receive payments, there's no real standardized way of doing so that's easy to roll out.
Yeah, that's super useful to have. And I just noted that I had a question about your AuthID. So this is something that you guys have kind of made to kind of authenticate kind of trades as well?
Yeah, that's a completely different side project. It's here in Sweden, we've got this bank ID, it's called. So it's an ID issued by a consortium of banks.
Yeah.
So it's got the highest level of assurance of your identity, since you need to show up to the bank, they ID you in person, and it's used for everything here in Sweden, everything from tax returns to opening accounts with online brokers to looking at your title deeds for property, etc. I mean, it's used for absolutely everything.
Wow.
sign contracts online, etc., etc. And so this works fantastic in Sweden. Nobody could live without it, basically. And if you look abroad, so we'd very much like to onboard a global public to our platform. So how do we do so? So the question was, do we do like all the other exchanges where they need to upload documents, etc., etc. And we realized, why not make a bank ID clone where it's effectively copy paste of everything, but the main difference between being, instead of having to do the KYC process with the Swedish bank, because it's very limiting if you're trying to be a global uptake business. So we figured, why not make an app where the onboarding is done remotely, just like all the other exchanges. So basically, you just enter your email address, mobile phone number, scan your passport. If you have an Android phone, you can put the phone towards the passport. You get all the NFC details, and then you do a Face ID scan where you check the eye movements, etc. So it's and then you need to upload a proof of residency document. So it works just like any other onboarding, but you have now everything in an app. And hopefully, if other services also start using it, you're able to be onboarded there with ease, since you've already done one onboarding in AuthID. So you can walk around, and but then there's also the benefit of having authenticated logins, and you can sign documents, etc., etc.
Yeah, I guess it just allows you a lot of flexibility, I guess, to do it.
And I think the crypto world is ideal for this, since it's such a, shall we say, global marketplace, and everyone uses the same services, basically.
Yeah.
So if you can get a foothold somewhere, it might spread outside the sector. But right now, we're looking just to get a foothold in this sector. So we'll see. It's a very nice app, though.
Okay, cool. Cool. Okay, so just to kind of wind down, so what is in the future for you, kind of going into the next couple of years and maybe longer as well?
I mean, for us, the longevity is key. Right now, we've just released the platform where we're gently rolling it out. What will be next is that we deliver the APIs so that anyone can connect programmatically, so that you don't need an actual wallet that we've developed, but so that we can integrate towards basically any service or any wallet. Right now, we just have our own wallet, which is, shall we say, the first proof of concept, which has integrated towards the service. That's step one. I think step two is developing a one-day futures market, basically, where we have cash settlement at the end of the day, and then we do Bitcoin settlement on the net delivery obligations. This is to have a hedging market, to not have to do delivery trade by trade in real time. So it's more of a high frequency market, as opposed to the XBT market, where you have delivery on each trade, and also allows for margin trading. So these I think are the next near-term two steps. We're coming out with a new Armory, or Farod is releasing a new Armory release shortly. So we're looking forward to that as well, and hopefully that will help build traction for what we're building. Yeah.
That sounds great, Scott. I didn't ask about your other two clients more in detail, but maybe another time. Farod and Albert, right?
Albert, yeah.
Okay. It was really nice to talk, Scott. And so I just realized we're running out of time, but hopefully, we'll keep an eye on how Blocksettle is getting on, and really excited to see how you guys get on.